Good morning, I'm Claire Murphy. Welcome to the Solo Bureau. How's your mental health today? There has been quite a lot of focus on our mental well-being in recent years, and for very good reason. Collectively, the data shows that the state of our mental health is in decline, driven by younger generations experiencing higher rates of anxiety, mood disorders, and psychological distress when you compare them to older generations. But is that rate a true reflection of where we are as a society and the strain it's putting on our mental well-being? Or is it a case of us just being more open to discussing and sharing that we're just not doing okay? We'll speak to someone who has done the research on exactly that. But before we dig into our little brains, here's what's been happening while you were sleeping. It's Monday, August 3. The fuel excise has now officially ended. As of midnight, the remaining 16-cent per litre tax cut is no longer in play. The excise cut was brought in by the federal government when fuel prices rose in response to the conflict in the Gulf. But despite those tensions flaring up again and oil transport again disrupted in the Strait of Hormuz, the Albanese government has ended the cut, meaning petrol prices will begin to rise from today. The price rise won't be immediate, though. It does take time for service stations to sell their remaining fuel that they have purchased at the lower tax cut price. Australians are being warned to prepare for mass bird mortalities as cases of the deadly H5 bird flu spread in local wild bird populations. There are now at least 54 confirmed cases across the country, with the majority of those in South Australia, with 40 confirmed. Testing is also currently underway on around 80 birds that were found at Borden Rocks Island, just off of SA's Cape Jaffa. There has not been any transmission in the local poultry or domestic bird populations. Former radio host Karl Sandilands says he's been receiving death threats. In an interview with former Today Show host Karl Sandilands said letters had started turning up at his office saying if he ever did anything on any platform, that whoever wrote the letters would kill him, that he'd be hunted down. Sandilands described what he believes is an assassination culture, pointing to the case in New York of the head of a health insurance company who was gunned down. Sandilands saying these people feel empowered and that we can't be having all these extremes. The comments come despite Stefanovic's own podcast recently hosting the head of a British far-right movement whose extremist behaviour has seen him convicted of multiple crimes. Sandilands also blamed the end of his radio career on his former co-host Jackie Henderson, saying due to someone's bad mood, that fell apart. The pair then agreed that the legal system was designed to squash the little person, referring to themselves as the little people in their fight to keep their media jobs. Israel has shared serious security concerns with the Trump administration over the proposed disarmament deal with Hamas. Hamas agreed to begin disarming as part of the US-brokered ceasefire aimed at ending the near 3-year-long conflict. President Donald Trump's 20-point ceasefire plan hinges on the militant group surrendering its weapons and destroying its vast network of tunnels. However, Doron Spielman, a spokesman for the Israeli Prime Minister's office, told AP that Israel's intelligence assessment is that Hamas remains committed to rebuilding its military rather than genuinely demilitarizing, and that the Israeli military will not withdraw from the Gaza Strip, where it controls more than 60% of the territory, before Hamas disarms. Sergei Sobyanin, the mayor of Moscow, has called a bomb attack on a restaurant in the capital a brutal terrorist attack. He didn't name who he thought was responsible for the Saturday evening blast at an upscale Italian restaurant in Russia's capital that killed 3 people, including the bomber, believed to be a woman. At least 21 others were injured in the blast, a woman reportedly attempting to smuggle the bomb inside the establishment, but a security guard refused to let her in before the bomb exploded. So far, no one has claimed responsibility for the attack, and investigations are continuing. Wildfire conditions in Europe have worsened over the weekend. Europe has been ravaged by fires this northern summer after a period of successive record-breaking heat waves and very little rain. Several more fires have broken out in Greece after a short period where conditions seemed to calm. In one escalating blaze, firefighters, police and ambulances had to withdraw as a huge wall of fire and smoke engulfed forests northwest of Athens. 2 firefighting helicopters also collided while helping to control the huge wildfire that has destroyed destroyed more than 100 homes. In France, a fire in the mountainous southeast, which had been brought under control 3 days ago, flared up again, forcing authorities to evacuate nearly 2,500 people. Spanish firefighters also are battling several hotspots 2 days after the government had declared the end of a national emergency caused by huge fires in the country's central provinces. Meanwhile, wildfires across more than 100,000 hectares in Washington state in the US have also led to widespread evacuations and power outages in the Spokane area. To the Commonwealth Games now, and cyclist Georgia Baker, who scored a record-equalling gold medal haul in a Commonwealth Games, will be Australia's flag bearer at the closing ceremony. She took silver in the women's elimination race behind teammate Alyssa Pilates overnight, leaving her tied for the most Australian cycling gold medals at the Games. She had already scored gold in the scratch race and the team pursuit, adding to the 3 she won at the Birmingham Games. Also on the last day of the Games, Aussie Lee Hoffman made history, becoming the first Australian cyclist to win 4 medals at the One Games when he took out the 1 kilometre men's time trial. That gave him 3 gold and 1 silver in Glasgow. Australia's oldest athlete at this Com Games also scored a gold overnight in the B6 to B8 lawn bowls. 76-year-old Louise Hoskins and her 44-year-old bowls partner Serena Bonnell won their final match 6-3, 4-4 to take the win. Hoskins saying she's still pinching herself, saying, "I never thought I'd ever get a medal at my age. Get out there and have a go and never give up." The Diamonds have taken out bronze after their shock defeat by Jamaica. They rallied to take out England in their third-place match, 68-50. And after protests over the second and third placings in the 4x100-metre relay, Aussie gold medalists Lachlan Kennedy, Josh Azzopardi, Caleb Law and Rowan Browning, along with heat runner Christopher Ayers, had their medal ceremony atop the dais in front of almost no one. The crowd had already left after the final race was run and won. An hour later, and 3.5 hours after they'd run, the athletes finally had their moment atop the podium once the minor placings were confirmed. Those are your top stories today, folks. Next, are we struggling more with our mental health today than we did in generations before? Let's take a look at the numbers. The rate of young Aussies suffering from mental health disorders is rising. According to the Lancet Regional Health Western Pacific study, led by the Matilda Centre for Mental Health and Substance Use at the University of Sydney, who examined national survey data of people aged 16 to 24 over the period between 2007 and 2022, the proportion of young Australians meeting the diagnostic criteria for anxiety, mood or substance disorders increased from 23.4% to 36.2%. Suicidal thoughts for people aged 16 to 24 more than doubled, and the spike in severe mental disorders is alarming, up from 14.7% to 24%. Mental disorders were more common in women, but increases were also observed in the male population, following a similar upward trend. Professor Tim Slade, one of the co-authors of that study, made sure to point out that this increase is not the result of us being more aware of mental health and being more willing to talk about it. But does the data actually say that? Sabrina Lenson is a Senior Research Fellow in Health Economics at the University of Queensland and is the co-author of a new study called The Good Old Days, Mental Health Across Birth Cohorts, which looked at that question. When you compare mental health rates and the destigmatisation of talking about it, do younger people struggle with their mental health more now than boomers or Gen X and elder millennials? Sabrina, welcome to the Solo Bureau.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Your article in The Conversation was really interesting and I think addresses something that comes up frequently now when we talk about a lot of things. And I mean things like ADHD, endometriosis, autism. There's a whole list of things that we say out loud, is this really happening in higher numbers now, or are we just talking about it more? So you've focused in on mental health. First of all, can you explain what kind of data you've been using to track the trends of young people's mental health?
Yeah, sure. So we are working a lot with survey data. And so this is specifically the Household Income and Labour Dynamics Survey in Australia. The survey started in 2001, and it's a household survey, meaning certain households in Australia are selected, and then people in the household are being interviewed on a range of subjects, so demographic characteristics, but then also their health, their income, lifestyle factors. And so, this survey has been running for now more than 20 years. Also, what's really neat about this, it's a longitudinal survey, which means they're interviewing exactly the same families every year. And so here we were looking at how they responded to questions that asked them about their mental health.
So when you took that data and broke it down and then sort of compared it to generations before, what did it tell you? How did it speak to you?
Yeah, so what we were observing, and this is not just specific for Australia, but we've been seeing this in a lot of developed countries around the world, is that overall mental health seemed to be declining. And once we broke this down into age groups and generations, we saw that it's primarily the younger age groups or, the earlier birth cohorts that reported worse mental health compared to older ages and older birth cohorts.
Do we have any idea why that's the case? Is it because they do genuinely suffer worse mental health outcomes now than generations before them? Or is the answer to that, the question we've all been asking, is it just because we're talking about it more?
So this is the question we were really interested in. And so what we try to do is we try to predict their mental health based on a lot of responses they gave in this survey. And we collected particularly those questions that we know are predictors for mental health. So one is questions on life events. So, whether someone experienced the death of a spouse or a child during their lifetime. We were looking into loneliness, the number of friends, their lifestyle habits, whether they are physically active, whether they drink or not. We then were able to estimate how likely these risk factors impact mental health. And then depending on responses of what people responded to these questions, we were able to predict their mental health. And comparing what we then predicted to what people reported, we were kind of able to disentangle this, reporting the changes in reporting of mental health compared to what we would expect their mental health to look like. And I guess what we found is both. Like, first of all, we saw that younger people or younger generations were more likely to report being mentally distressed. So they had a lower threshold for reporting being in distress. But we also found that even based on all those risk factors, they are way more likely to be in worse mental health.
Okay, so then that begs the next question. Is talking about it actually making it better if we're seeing that their mental health is actually worse off?
Yeah, so I guess that's probably not a question I can answer, as I'm just an economist. And I guess we would maybe have to talk to a psychologist. We, as health economists, think that it's probably a good thing because people are then able to, get help. And often just talking about mental health problems can help deal with it better. So overall, we think it's probably a good trend that people are more willing to report they are don't have great mental health. And also it allows us to understand better, how people feel.
You mentioned before that you were breaking it down into generational gaps, and I'd love to know, we do focus quite a bit on young people's mental health because we know that it has been impacted. There's lots of studies that talk about how the increase in social media has impacted them, the kind of digital world that they're living in. There's lots of different factors, including the fact that the climate crisis is happening and there are wars going on, like so many different things. But how are older people faring in your studies? Are they reporting the same thing where they are actually seeing a decline in mental health, or are they staying pretty steady?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I guess the tricky part is that, of course, we don't observe older people when they were younger. I mean, only to some extent. You have to think this survey is now going for, we look into 22 years of data. But what we can say is that older generations, especially male, were really underreporting their mental health. So they were actually claiming to have better mental health than what they actually had, especially, this baby boomer generation, 1960 to 1970 birth cohorts. what we were able to look into is like life cycle patterns. And what we know from the literature is that usually we see a dip in mental health around midlife, which had kind of been disappeared in this raw self-reported data when we were looking at it now. But once we correct now for this reporting heterogeneity, we do find that that life cycle pattern comes back, and we see this decrease in mental health during midlife.
Is that majority women, Sabrina, who start to suffer symptoms of perimenopause in their 40s? Is that taken into consideration?
We actually see both genders have that U-shaped, we call it usually, mental health trajectory. What the literature tells us that it is primarily, the stress that we're having during this midlife. It's usually financial, we're in the middle of our career trying to, establish ourselves. A lot of people becoming parents, and that adds a lot of stress, time stress. And so really it's just a tricky part of life.
Just to circle back around and take us back to young Aussies right now, basically the research that you've done and the data that you've looked at, without being a psychologist and being able to discuss the reasons why this might be happening, we could pin it all on the pandemic at this stage. But basically the numbers are telling us that yes, we are definitely reporting mental health issues way more than generations before, but also mental health rates are on decline. Is that what we can extrapolate from that data?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So if we look into our youngest birth cohort, so those are born after 2000, what we see is actually the prevalence, or the percentage of young adults who report poor mental health is almost 70%. But then even after adjusting for this, being more likely to report poor mental health, even then we predict it to be around 50%. So that's a huge, huge prevalence of poor mental health.
Sabrina, thank you so much for crunching the numbers on this for us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks for hanging out today, friends. If you are listening to this and are finding it difficult to be in your brain right now, please speak to someone. You may think people will judge you or that you'll be a burden, but you know what's worse? You suffering in silence and people wondering what the hell's going on rather than just knowing and being able to help. So speak to those close to you, speak to someone at Lifeline. They are always standing by and are excellent at what they do. 13 11 14. Speak to your GP, get a mental health plan. They'll put you on a therapist who can help you sort through all of this messy stuff. So get onto it. Let's be mentally healthy together. Have a great day, friends. I'll catch you tomorrow.